Thank you. So, yes, I did teach Ron. He was a student, as I see many other familiar faces. I teach in the Department of Computer Science at the U of M. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also a novelist, working on my second novel, which is about a computer scientist. So be forewarned, I will be studying you and unabashedly stealing ideas. Now, I have no PowerPoint slides. There is a certain irony to that. I mean, I have slides, but we can't show them for a variety of technical reasons. So the title of my talk is Why You Build a Bridge Higher. I'll let you think about the bridge picture for a minute while I mention that my talk today is about a different type of security. The security I come to talk about is both more pervasive than any group of hackers, more difficult to solve than any password, and doesn't care about security protocols. I'm here to alarm you about a security of thought and politics. In short, I want to concern you that you are the minds controlling technology, and as such you bear a burden. You are designing, protecting, choosing, yes, controlling the technologies of the present, and as such, determining those of the future. As you control and change these technologies, you control and change the cultural and social political landscapes that rely on these technologies. That's the good part. You have power. Now here's the alarming part. You yourselves are being simultaneously controlled by the same societal and political forces. Yes, I intend to get you a bit paranoid. I'm not talking tinfoil in the windows, but I do want to ask you to become aware of the ways that the politics of technology quietly but pervasively shape and change the ways you think, the outcomes you expect, the standards you set, the topics you investigate. In other words, I want to talk to you, the shapers of technology, culture, and politics, about the way technology, culture, and politics are simultaneously shaping you. My first question is, what is wrong with this bridge? There's a truck stuck under it. Okay, the bridge is too short. Truck's too tall? Excellent. Someone knows the article. Very good point. So the history of this bridge, and it is written about in an article I will show you somehow in just a moment, is this bridge is in the parkways of Long Island, New York. It was designed by the architect Robert Moses and built, there are a series of these bridges built between the 1920s and the 70s. The notable part about the bridges is that they're short. They're not very tall. What kind of vehicle can get under the bridge? Cars. Obviously, what kind of vehicles cannot fit? Trucks. And do you think a public bus would fit? Unlikely. I think the answer is no. So this is where the story turns a bit dark. It turns out that Robert Moses, and there are different versions of this tale, but Robert Moses had a vested interest in keeping a beach near his very nice house on Long Island, keeping the beach not too busy and with a certain type of clientele, which was once described as upper or comfortable, people of upper or comfortable classes. At this time in Long Island's history, you can imagine there were also racial lines that were encouraged to use the beach and not. So, in other words, this bridge, I mean, Robert Moses certainly had political views, but the question I'd like to ask you is, do you think the bridge itself could have a politics? Could the bricks and mortar and the steel have ethical qualities? In an article that's quite well known now, Okay, so in this article called Do Artifacts Have Politics? Langdon Winner, it was published in 1980. He makes the case that, in fact, a bridge, bricks, mortar, could have ethical qualities. Not just exist in an ethical environment or a political environment, but it itself could be seen as to embody what Winner calls as social inequality. So today I want to advocate for a way of expanding your thinking to think about technology and security in a way that invites awareness of the political forces that are at play in the work you do. The first slide, the next slide I would show you would have a word on it called Sociotechnical System. And this is a term that is becoming more and more popular, suggesting that technology cannot be just evaluated for its artifact. You can't just evaluate the server, the router, the circuit board, the firewall, the cell phone, for the technology itself. You have to evaluate it in the larger social and political system. This is a field of study that has been around since the 1970s, and it's becoming really popular. It's called Science and Technology Studies. The major programs are at MIT, Cornell, and Harvard. In Canada, there's a graduate program now at the University of Victoria, UBC, that's what's not coming up. Often science and technology studies are studied by students in history, English, and philosophy, and more they're being placed within computer science and engineering faculties and departments. So there are three major tenets of this way of thinking about society. And the first one, so you'll have to envision this, is to reject technological determinism. So this means, it's tempting to think of this, but technological determinism assumes that technology develops by some invisible hand. So instead of thinking, oh, we had radio, so of course the next step would be the television, and then since we had the television, and then we had math and logic and electricity and machinery, technological determinism would say, well, then the computer was just the logical next step. So that is a dangerous way of thinking about technology because it seems to assume that technology evolves on its own. In actual fact, it's more, I think, it's important to acknowledge that technology is not developed merely because there is the technical need and ability. Technology is developed from a collection of political, social, and technical factors. Have you seen the movie The Imitation Game? Okay, so it's about Alan Turing, we could say the founder of computer science. And I think the movie does a good job of demonstrating the political and social factors that went into developing and almost not developing the first computer. You can debate that, but an important step in computing history. It wasn't just that the technology was available. It's not that they had enough math and theory and a meager collection of other machines that could serve as a model. It's very relevant that there was a war, there was a desperate need, there was military rule, there was an academic mathematician with a strong desire to build a machine who suddenly had funding at his disposal. None of those things are accidental in the development of the computer. Much research and technology is determined by funding mandates and grant requirements, which in turn are determined by the government at hand. The point to all of this is that the computer is not just the next logical predetermined step. The computer was influenced by, in this case, dire political forces. We often see that war drives technological invention, and you can imagine that other forces could include capitalism, consumerism, social drive, security. The movie also raises questions of personal politics. The movie makes the point, it's a tragic story that makes the point also, that the people funded and encouraged to work on the Turing machine were white, or they were expected to be white, middle-class, heterosexual males. How would the history of technology be different if a more diverse group had been given the same opportunities as were available to this one particular group? Okay, so that was the first tenet. The second one is to reject technology as merely the artifact or the object. So when you think of an object of technology, think of your cell phone. It's not very interesting to think of your cell phone on its own. Rather, you need to think of it as part of an entire process or a sociotechnical system. I find it helpful to compare and contrast different technologies that do similar things to get a sense of how the socio factors surrounding the technology change the technology itself. For instance, both coal mines and solar power panels create and store usable energy. But do you see how those technologies may be evaluated to have different political qualities? A coal mine does very little for the individual. You need to have a hierarchical, probably, bureaucratic society before a coal mine can do much. Solar power panels, on the other hand, an individual can put a solar panel on a roof. You don't need to be on the grid. And it's a much more democratic form of power. You can imagine the same sort of differences. Contrast YouTube with cable television. Compare Encyclopedia Britannica, should you still remember what that is, to Wikipedia. That's an interesting one. There are obvious echoes of Wikipedia, we can argue, is very democratic. Wikipedia also has a strange phenomena where it rewards the opinion of the populace. So a funny thing starts to happen to the concept of expert and knowledge and arguably even truth. It becomes what most people think it is. So there are some lurking dangers in some of these technologies as well. Contrast keys, like the ones you keep on a keychain, with a swipe card. They both open doors, but one leaves a record. How does that change the technology itself? Maps versus GPS. Strong encryption with backdoors compared to end-to-end encryption. Encryption is a hot topic right now, and likely only to become more debated since the tragic and recent events happening in France. It's easy to see end-to-end encryption as democratic, supportive of privacy, and individualistic. A backdoor would be a more totalitarian and bureaucratic solution. This encryption debate opens up questions of who should control technology, the individual or the state. There are elements of fear and, some might say, optimism. At stake are huge questions of privacy and governmental control. If there's a backdoor, who can access it? Can they be trusted? The point of listing this here is that strong encryption without a state, perhaps without a culture of a fear of terrorism, would not be understood in the same technological terms. So the culture and the politics into which strong encryption enters has to be evaluated along with the technical artifact itself. We cannot evaluate encryption without considering the social and political context. A side note, but one thing that's interesting to consider and humbling is that the politics of technology are often changed by historical perspective. In this article, Winner writes, "Scarcely a new invention comes along that someone does not proclaim it as the salvation of a free society." After explaining an argument that solar power promises democracy, whereby nuclear power requires a totalitarian regime, Winner summarizes the comparison between solar and nuclear energy by saying, "The factory system, automobile, telephone, radio, television, the space program, and of course nuclear power itself have all at one time or another been described as a democratizing, liberating force." So as history gets written, the values of technology are prone to change. The third point is reject technology as value neutral. So instead, think of technology as political. And this brings us right back to the bridge. Whereas, so technology, the bridge itself, I'm advocating, trying to persuade you, that the bridge itself contains values. Johnson says that artifacts are infused with value. So a bridge is a very, pardon the pun, but a very concrete technology. If we think of a technology that's much more abstract, algorithms in this crowd at this time come to mind. Have you read the book 9 Algorithms That Changed the Future? Okay, so I found this book quite fascinating. And one of the algorithms they describe is PageRank. So a question to you is, what are the politics of PageRank? The most elementary description of PageRank is to say that websites that have more links have a higher page rank and thus are returned sooner in the list of results on a search engine. Well, you get the point. So popularity increases rank. So arguably, PageRank is democratic. It's like Wikipedia, could be considered anti-establishment. And that's the other thing about PageRank, which of course I think we all know was developed by the people that went on to found Google, is that ironically and perhaps alarmingly, PageRank, which founded the Google search engine and may have started off as anti-establishment, arguably has become the new establishment. It seems also only prudent to mention, if I'm describing that technology must exist in a larger political context, I think I must mention that PageRank means very little if you live in China, and other countries, where the search engine results are subject to firewalls. Have you ever Googled Tiananmen Square in Google? That's ironic. That doesn't make sense. Look up Tiananmen Square using the search engine Google, and then use the same, copy and paste that term into Baidu, which is China's #1 search engine, and you will find astonishingly different results. So this shows that search engines and their algorithms are not operating as mere technology, but they are part of and must be evaluated within a political and social culture. So what's the big point? How does this talk relate to you as information professionals? My point is that if technology exists as part of a socio-technical system, then the people that design technology, you, need to be aware of the impacts of the technology you develop, as well as the influences that determine which technologies you work on and contribute to. I'm saying that software and security protocols are not just written out of technical imperative. They are written into and as a result of a larger social phenomena. It's important that when we introduce people to computer science and engineering, we explain that you need to think about the politics of the technology you work with, the politics of the programs you write, the politics of the networks you secure, the politics of the people you hire, the politics of the algorithms you code, the politics of the privacy settings you determine, the politics of the search engines you use. And whether you're an IT professional or even a technology user, all of these decisions you make change the socio-technical landscape, while that same landscape changes the way you yourself think about technology. So what are you to do? It's arguably impossible to know how we are being shaped by society. Inherent in looking at ourselves, we will always encounter a blind spot. But there are some broad principles you could apply. I've got 4. They're fast. 1, be inclusive. Look for ways to, between you and the people you work with, look for ways to engage others and make your work culture inclusive. 2, encourage everyone you know to learn a bit about coding. Imagine if we had a language that only a few people could speak, but everyone depended on the people that spoke that language. Those few people, those speakers, would have a lot of power, and maybe too much power. That's why it's important that everyone tries their hand at speaking the language. We need a language that can address concerns and interests of everyone, not just the few people that know how to speak it, not just the few people that know how to code. This is one of the reasons why it's important to have diversity in our programmers. We need representations of all minorities and ideally an equal distribution of women and men. Everyone should have an idea of what's going on inside the computers they rely on. That's why there's a worldwide initiative called the Hour of Code. Have you heard of this? This is something that if you haven't heard of it, or if you have, I encourage you to get involved with. Offer a coding workshop in your place at work, volunteer to come into the school of some of the kids in your life, or just sit down with a friend. 3, increase awareness. Speak up about policy changes. When you make a decision, ask yourself, what are the social and political factors behind this choice? Evaluate the technology you choose for the way it's changing the socio-technical landscape. Speak up if your political version of the world is different from the political qualities of the technology you're working on. Anonymous, which, like many institutions, has both great and dubious qualities, did a great job campaigning for net neutrality. Be aware and consider political activism in large or small ways about technical issues that matter to you. And lastly, be aware of the power you have. You are not hired guns. If you are told to do something, you can make the decision as to whether or not to do it. Of course, you can make the argument, if I don't do it, someone else will, and that may be the conclusion you come to. But there is a difference between simply doing or doing after, or refusing after evaluating the situation. Technology is changing the world, and these are not just random changes. Technology is being written by particular people, paid for by particular people, and usually compliant with certain government and institutional laws. But nothing can happen without the people who write the code and run the networks. Be aware of your power. What kind of bridges are you designing? Who are you letting in? Who are you keeping out?